And they're already firing. You're hearing them go all the time. So clearly there's a ground offensive on the foot. Like, yeah, you could just on the march, you can see it. There's soldiers everywhere. It's a war zone. It's literally a war zone. On the other hand, they can't maintain a 400,000 person mobilization in a country of at most 9 million people forever. You just cannot. There's no good answers, right? I think that this, now I wouldn't say bloodlust exactly, but the desire for vengeance was maybe weaned off a little bit. And it's like the thought that they're going to like level Gaza top to bottom is just not going to happen. But obviously, just today, Biden tweeted about the two-state solution, which I find funny, right? The two-state solution is still this sort of like refrain in the Western world, like, oh yeah, we're going to have a two-state solution. Like literally, if like if the fence has so much as the gap, right, you're going to have elements of that society emerge who will literally engage in the most barbaric violence known to man. Right, because clearly nobody would accept that. This is a two-state solution. There's two states, and if you eliminate a segment of fence, you get total horrors. There you go. I think the West just doesn't understand what it means to be at the liberal fringes of the liberal, the violent fringes of the liberal order, and what that actually means, because they don't know. They live in this video game called Twitter, in which all their political struggles are virtual, and you get canceled rather than shot and killed, and they think that's real somehow, and the video game is real. And they don't know what it is to actually be inside. Right. I mean, that's what I tweeted, right? You're dealing with the people who would annihilate another people if they could, but they can't. And you've got that other people who could annihilate that first people, but they don't. And that in fact is the problem. Because if Israel is all that it's being cracked up to be by these Western left, they would have annihilated the Palestinians, but they don't. Actually, they don't, because they don't want to. That's the reality of it.
Hey, what's up, man?
Yo.
Yo.
Wow, the man of the hour.
Yeah.
Where are you right now?
Oh, Tel Aviv, off Bogershos and Ben Yehuda in a nice part of Tel Aviv. Wow, relatively nice.
And so 40 minutes away, tell us where you were today. Like, walk us through what you did.
Oh, yeah. So today I went to southern Israel, up close to the Gaza border, which is a complete fucking war zone, as it turns out. A little more dangerous than I thought it would be. A little more spicy than I thought I was getting into. It turns out Israelis are crazy, and they will have a full-on war interleaved with like civilian areas. Again, all of it like 35, 40 minutes from Tel Aviv. And given that we're living in capital H history, your tribe would go to war against the next tribe after the last genocide. And so like you're seeing the tribe gear up. And yeah, we're driving around. So for our American audience whose notion of world geography comes from playing Risk when they were 12, we have to specify that Israel is a 11-team country, and there's this little thing called the Gaza Strip that's approximately 42 kilometers long. It's actually quite long. It's as long as the distance from the top of Gaza is to Tel Aviv. And I don't know, 5-6 kilometers wide, fairly narrow. But it's in a part of Israel that is historically kind of desert, but then there's a lot of kibbutzim, the kibbutz, these sort of like agricultural collectives, which, by the way, are typically occupied by lefty hippies. So if you're like a nice, crunchy lefty hippie family, instead of moving to Portland, which is what you do in the United States, in Israel, you move to a kibbutz in South Israel. And these kibbutzim, have an economy. The one I went to, the one that got massacred, buried, in which 1 in 4 people were either murdered or kidnapped. Very sad place now. But they have a huge print shop, one of the biggest print shops in Israel, that prints everything from license plates to everything, or driver's licenses to everything else. And so, yeah, that's where I was. And it's weird because it's 2 weeks after, almost to the day after the attack. But, a lot of it, some of it has been cleaned away, some of it hasn't. There's still cars around with like bullet holes and stuff. You still see blood stains and stuff on the street. And then there's a war going on. The IDF is mobilized. You drive around and you make the wrong left turn because there's a checkpoint and they won't let you go through, even with a press pass. And so you make a left into the thing, and you freak out the kibbutz security force, which, by the way, is behind these piled concrete bags that you didn't quite see. And suddenly you've got like at least 8 ARs trained on you, and you're all like signaling that. They're like, no, everyone relax. And you get out and you start chit chatting, and they turn friendly very quickly, as Israelis do. And you offer them cigarettes to kind of calm the situation. They're like, no, we want pot. And I'm like, sorry, I didn't bring any. And you kind of laugh. And then you look to your right, and there's like at least a platoon, if not 2 platoons of Merkava tanks who have staged there. You didn't quite see them when you made the turnoff, but they're kind of hidden behind the trees. And there they are. And there's all the Merkava tankers are outside because it's hot. and they're just sitting there, right? It's like, oh, fuck. Interesting. And they're much bigger, by the way, than in person than you kind of see in the picture. They're big. And so, yeah, that's what it is, driving around in the chaos. And then you get the constant rocket alarms. You hear artillery going on. It sounds like a thunderstorm going all the time. And then if you're an idiot like we were, so sorry, I'm kind of rambling here, but if you drove up, we drove past the concert venue, the famous place with the desert conference thing where so many people were killed and kidnapped, and we just accidentally drove past it. By the way, and we're navigating without GPS. Well, I don't know how, but the IDF manages to jam the GPS if your phone's GPS doesn't work throughout most of this stuff intentionally. And so we're like, oh my God, this looks exactly like the concert venue saying. So we pulled over and they've cleared up the cars and the bodies and everything, of course, but you can still see the remains of like the tents and all the garbage and shit still left there. And so we're like looking around and kind of keeping a distance, taking a photo, and then suddenly, boom! And you didn't see it, but you were 100 meters away from an artillery battery that was in the trees, probably one of the 155 millimeter big self-propelled cannon that society could let off a shell. And you're all like, oh my God, what the fuck happened? And then you're like, okay, let's keep on going. You keep on going. So that was kind of the vibe. And there's a human touch too, right? So like all of Israel, right? Like literally 6 months ago, they were at each other. I mean, I did a piece for Tablet. I was here for business, as I sort of am now, by the way. Everyone thinks that I'm like LARPing or Hemingway, but we have reasons to be in Israel for tech reasons too. But in any case, obviously it's partially due to the war. And everyone was at each other's throats for this whole judicial reform thing that was going on, right? And what's fascinating is a lot of the groups that actually mobilized and organized to be against the judicial reform, which is a whole thing that we had another episode on that's not worth repeating here. They're like within a second of the attacks happening, pivoted to mobilizing for the war efforts, right? Which is interesting. And so Brothers in Arms, there's a whole tech group, all these groups that were basically mobilizing against the BB judicial reform. So I'm like, oh my God, it's wartime, it's the Blitz. Everyone go that way. And so sort of the biggest convention center in Tel Aviv, what they call the Expo Center, which is kind of like the Moscone Center in San Francisco, to cite a very local example, has been completely taken over by these NGOs. And so they have like a WeWork co-working startup thing, and it's totally taken over by people organizing relief efforts for everybody, reservists, orphans, right? A lot of the families that are killed, the entire family was killed, and you've got two-year-old twins. Well, who takes care of them? They have no family left. They've literally murdered the entire family except the kids who survived in the safe room or whatever. And you deal with that, right? Getting food down there, etc. So there was the sort of startup area, and the weird thing is that there's so much tech talent in Israel that you've got like somebody who's like CMO for like a unicorn startup or like a unicorn company who's like running comms for one of these organizations. Right? This woman who has like a EVP title is just like the woman who greets you at the thing and like is walking you through it, and you like LinkedIn stock, and it's like, oh, you're kind of an important executive and you're like managing this whole thing because all of society is mobilized for this. So that's like the startup side. And there's another part where they reminded me of Ukraine actually. When I was in Ukraine on the border, they have like a whole warehouse area in the parking lot where everyone donates all sorts of things, and it's like baby stuff, male, female, warm clothing. It's a desert, at night it gets cold, so the troops deploy and it gets cold. And then they've taken over the expo hall, and they have a bunch of AI scientists and computer guys hacking on how do we actually find the hostages. So they ingest literally all the videos from all the various streams, a lot of the Palestinian Telegram channels and whatnot, and try to identify the faces and see where they are and geotype and all that stuff. Kind of hush hush about it, as they should be. So yeah, there's a lot kind of going on, right? The whole society is mobilized in a very serious way, whether it be in Tel Aviv, which again is like Miami with an actual tech scene, or whether it be in the southern part of Israel, which is maybe the vision you're having of Israel of, the kibbutz and the agricultural part and the green, whatever, and the sort of desert, like it looks very sort of Israeli. And even here where it's not, it's total war in the Clausewitzian sense happening in the 21st century.
Antonio, do you have any read from talking to people on the ground why things were taking so long? Right? Because it felt like there was directly after 10/7, massive amount of mobilization, kind of getting a handle on things from the terrorist attack. But now we're 2 weeks in, right?
Yeah, no, and it's still mobilized.
What's the delay?
Yeah, Israel is mostly, people don't realize it. Their active duty service, I forget the active number, but the active duty is like less than 100K. Israel is one of the world's largest, top 10 army, but it's because they have a mass conscription, and so they can come up with almost 500,000 soldiers, but 400,000 of them are literally reservists. And so if you're an able-bodied male or female, for that matter, you will serve until your 30s or 40s. That is just the cost of Israeli citizenship. And so the entire society is mobilized. You see a lot more soldiers in Tel Aviv, where typically you don't see them. And then in Jerusalem, everything's just crawling with reservists. And you can tell the reservists are not necessarily the elite troops, right? It's just a guy in a military uniform, often carrying a rifle or whatever. But it's like a guy, right? Like 2 days before, he was like working at a start, doing whatever job he had, and now he is. So he's part of the Israeli military machine, and that has an economic cost, right? Like I know Startup Thunder, we have some of our business partners. People just have to go. They just I get called up. Sorry, I gotta go. So I had Shabbat dinner on Friday with one of the business partners, and his nephew, his nieces and nephews were in 8200, and they had to leave the Shabbat meal to go report for Shabbat evening to go, to go work at 8200 is like the signals intelligence part of Israel, out of which a lot of startups come, by the way, because Israel's fascinating. It's this total fusion. I mean, it's not obviously a fascist society, but if you imagine the fascist society with the union between industry and academia and the military and all that happening, that's kind of how it works, right, in Israel. And so, we have to go do that. But yeah, so why is it taking so long? There's various, depends how much you like or dislike Bibi, but you're very serious. One is he's a coward who doesn't want to go to war, which, well, take it for what you will. The other is that Biden's twisting his arm to get more hostages released. As yet, only 2, as far as I know, have been released. The views of the U.S. are also kind of mixed. On the one hand, very positive towards Biden, making a very strong statement and, carting out 2 different aircraft carriers and the whatever the ships are in the Red Sea, which, as far as I know, is the first time a naval ship has actually actively defended Israel. They shot down rockets going towards Israel from Yemen. It's people are kind of waiting. It is strange. On the other hand, I don't know. I talked to the father of the guy that I know who's old school IDF guy, and he's like, "Yeah, we should wait. It should be a long siege. We have to plan it. There's all these tunnels. There's hundreds, dozens of kilometers of tunnels underneath Gaza City and Gaza, where Hamas hides stuff, and so no one actually knows or has mapped it out as far as we know. And so actually taking that on, right, like you're walking into a massive trap that could cost thousands, if not tens of thousands, of Israeli lives."
Hey, we'll continue our interview in a moment after a word from our sponsors.
Compliance doesn't have to be complicated. In fact, with Vanta, it can be super simple. Trusted by over 5,000 fast-growing companies like Chili Piper, Patch, Gusto, and Juniper, Vanta automates the pricey, time-consuming process of prepping for SOC 2, ISO 27001, HIPAA, and more. With Vanta, you can save up to 400 hours and 85% of costs. Vanta scales with your business, helping you successfully enter new markets, land bigger deals, and earn customer loyalty. And bonus, our Moment of Zen listeners get $1,000 off Vanta. Just go to vanta.com/zen. That's VANTA.com/ZEN.
If you're a startup founder or executive running a growing business, you know that as you scale, your systems break down and the cracks start to show. If this resonates with you, there are 3 numbers you need to know: 36,000, 25, and 1. 36,000. That's the number of businesses which have upgraded to NetSuite by Oracle. NetSuite is the #1 cloud financial system, streamline accounting, financial management, inventory, HR, and more. 25. NetSuite turns 25 this year. That's 25 years of helping businesses do more with less, close their books in days, not weeks, and drive down costs. 1, because your business is one of a kind, so you get a customized solution for all your KPIs in one efficient system with one source of truth. Manage risk, get reliable forecasts, and improve margins. Everything you need all in one place. Right now, download NetSuite's popular KPI checklist, designed to give you consistently excellent performance, absolutely free, at netsuite.com/zen. That's netsuite.com/zen to get your own KPI checklist. netsuite.com/zen.
And maybe one thing, and I know we chatted on this group chat about this, but the Israelis had a soldier for 5 years who Hamas had kidnapped, and they traded something on the order of 1,000 Hamas or Palestinian prisoners for 1 IDF soldier, and now we're talking about 200 hostages. So, if they were willing to do that much before for 1 person, it just the hostage situation to me just seems it's horrific, and it doesn't feel like there's going to be a good outcome there. And I'd be curious, like what people's read on the street, given that there are 200 people who are and babies and old people. And
yeah, I know the person you're referring to is, his name is, for those who want to Google it, Gilad Shalit, and he was actually stationed close to Gaza, actually, and he was kidnapped. And it was like this nationwide ordeal for like 4 or 5 years, I think, in which the whole effort was to get him back. And it gives you an idea. I think there's something, I mean, I just kind of got to this party, so to speak. There's something deeply encrusted in like either the Jewish or the Israeli mind where not leaving hostages behind, leaving somebody behind is this massively, dolorous thing, because there's a level of cultural empathy here, because everyone's child serves, right? Every mother who sees the Gilad Shalit story imagines their son in that situation in a way that I think most Americans don't understand, right? And so they're very sensitive to the hostage situation. So you're exactly right. Now it's that times 200, right? And the last time I looked up, I think Israel has something like, I think it's 4,000 or 5,000 Palestinian prisoners. There's only so much they can trade, right? So they can't maintain the Shalit ratio to the tune of 200. It's impossible. So yeah, I think obviously the murders and the rapes and all the rest of it was horrendous, something beyond the pale of anything that Israel's faced before. But then the hostage thing is also beyond the pale. And I haven't heard any sort of cogent explanation for how to handle it. Driving here on the way back, we passed close to Ronen Market, which is this sort of Chelsea market type thing in Tel Aviv. There's a gathering point where the family of the hostages show up and just kind of express their frustration. Why isn't the government moving faster, etc.? Like, what else do? You have a child who's a hostage. You feel super frustrated. You can't do anything, so you go and you protest. And the taxi driver, I'm being treated mask about it. The taxi driver speculated, like, oh, this group's only going to get bigger and bigger as this goes on longer and longer, and very possibly so. Because, again, imagine you don't even know if your child's alive. All you know is that they didn't find the body. And by the way, they're still finding the bodies. So we went to Beri, which is Bethi. It has the apostrophe in it, which is one of the kibbutz that was just annihilated, right? Like literally a quarter of the people either murdered or kidnapped. And we went there, and again, there's so many eccentricities in Israeli society. It's hard to convey it, as Americans would understand it. So there's one thing in Judaism in which, in funerary customs, you have to bury the entire body. And again, obviously not a rabbi here. I can't go out and link as to why, but like capturing every last part of the body and burying it is critical. It's almost like when you read in the Iliad, the Greeks fighting over the dead body of whoever, because the funerary customs are so critical to society, they would literally risk their lives to get the dead body back. I mean, it's not quite what's going on here, but it's kind of the same thing, where the funerary custom is super important. So there's a whole core of people called Zeka, and it's, Orthodox Jews with, the Peyot, they're like Orthodox Jews, right? Who all volunteer. And what they do is when they go to the site of massacres and suicide bombs, when literally people have been detonated and splattered. And I saw some of the splats. We show you photos of it. We went into one of the bunkers, and it was riddled with bullets, and there was still like splash brown dried blood on the wall, right? Like that level of stuff. And you can still see it wander our car that was just shot through, and it was just caked in blood, and it reeked and just covered in flies, even now, 2 weeks later. And so these are the guys who go out and literally with like, it sounds like I'm being gallows humor, but it's not. Like literally with like tweezers and stuff, like every last little bone fragment to try to bury the entire body. And we went to Bethi, which all the kibbutz Nikim have left, but the Zaka people were still there, so they're still digging up bodies, right? So they're still trying to figure out where the bodies are and who's actually dead. So that so you don't know actually who's missing. It's kind of like Hamas, I assume, since the main list. You just know that there's so many missing and so many bodies have been identified, and the delta you assume is kidnapped, right? Like what else is there to assume? And so we're still at that point, right? You're still in one of the biggest and one of the big kibbutz, and they're still, digging up remains and trying to figure out who's dead and who's not.
What's going to happen? Or like, what is your prediction of like, what is the scale and scope of Israel's response going to be? And then the counter response to that?
I wish I was one of these geopolitical strategists who could sit here and very confidently predict the future of Middle Eastern geopolitics. It's clear that the state is gearing for war. Like we saw dug in positions with self-propelled artillery, like dug in clearly GPS coordinates. Like this is where we're shelling Gaza City from, and they're already firing. You're hearing them go all the time. So clearly there's a ground offensive on the foot. Like you can just on the march, you can see it. There's soldiers everywhere. It's a war zone. It's literally a war zone. So clearly something is going on. On the other hand, they can't maintain a 400,000 person mobilization in a country of at most 9 million people forever. You just cannot. And so something needs to give. And I don't know. There's no good answers, right? I think that now I wouldn't say bloodlust exactly, but the desire for vengeance was maybe weaned off a little bit. And it's like the thought that they're going to like level Gaza top to bottom is just not going to happen. But obviously, just today, Biden tweeted about the two-state solution, which I find funny, right? The two-state solution is still this sort of like refrain in the Western world, like, oh yeah, we're going to have a two-state solution. Like literally, if like if the fence has so much as the gap, right, you're going to have elements of that society emerge who will literally engage in the most barbaric violence known to man. Right? You what's the two-state situation here you're talking about? Because clearly nobody would accept that. This is a two-state solution. There's two states, and if you eliminate a segment of fence, you get total horrors. There you go. Right? But I don't know. I think this is one of these macro takes, but MOZ is known for it. But it's like I think the West just doesn't understand what it means to be at the liberal fringes of the violent fringes of the liberal order and what that actually means. Because they don't know. They live in this video game called Twitter, in which all their political struggles are virtual and you get canceled rather than shot and killed. And they think that's real somehow. And the video game is real. And they don't know what it is to actually be inside. Real war, real strife, real violence, not words of violence, actual violence, right? And so like it's something I think that it's very difficult for Westerners to understand. That you drive 40 minutes from like I literally had like craft beer and like hipster and tattooed servers, like the whole liberal catastrophe you would have in San Francisco, and literally in that same bar actually yesterday, you hear an alarm, everyone like rushes to the basement and like hangs out, and then boom, 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 and you go back to get beer, right? Like I don't think the Western mind truly understands that level of like, yeah, we're at the fringes of this thing, and if we don't struggle, our order, our society will collapse or be violently assaulted. Yeah, I don't think people in the West think that way anymore.
And Antonio, one thing, you pointed out that there's a bunch of information that's being shared, Telegram groups, and kind of dark social is the wrong term in the sense that it has like a negative connotation, but it's almost like stuff that's almost too real to be shown on Twitter or in mainstream media, of course. And I'm curious because it feels like in some ways, I've seen some of that stuff that's coming direct, and there's always a little part of my mind is like, okay, how much of this is being manipulated or whatever. But I think it's very hard to see that and then actually see that the discourse it feels very surface level. Like we're getting the like G-rated version or the PG-13 version of what happened in Israel versus when you actually see some of these clips. And I actually think the IDF and Israel itself is actually trying to push this on social media to the degree that it's allowed on the platforms they're pushing it out. But I'm curious, like, it feels like that should be more aggressively showcased in terms of just like how bad the atrocities were. Yep. Because I think otherwise it gets kind of like business as usual almost. It's like, oh, just another terrorist. Like, no, this was as brutal, 10 out of 10 brutal as it gets, outside of maybe gassing people in chambers in the Holocaust. Like this is as big of an atrocity as it gets.
Yeah, I mean the Holocaust example, and I know it's like there's like a joke among Jews is like how fast two Jews like do you converge on like the Holocaust? That's like it's not like right. And I agree it can be kind of overused, but I think what's different here, you hear people say it's like this is the Yom Kippur, like 9/11 is a bad metaphor because it's the relative impact of the United States in 9/11 was, I mean, it was a big deal, but relatively speaking, it was small. Every Israeli you meet knows someone who died or got kidnapped. Like literally everybody I've met. Oh yeah, my kids go to school with the son of the guy whose wife got kidnapped. Or, oh yeah, I work with the guy whose sister got killed at that concert thing. Like everybody is like one or two hops at most from somebody which is just not the case with 9/11. I didn't know anybody who died 9/11. As tragic as it was not that level of like national, everybody had somebody die. Where was I going with that? So I think the feeling of vulnerability, right? Like in the Yom Kippur, people will say, it's funny, the guy I interviewed today was a veteran of the Yom Kippur. He's the guy who runs the printing the press inside the women's kibbutz. He's like, yeah, I fought in the Yom Kippur War, but it was different. It was male soldier to male soldier. It wasn't men raping and killing women and children. It wasn't civilians, right? Scenes of Jews getting machine gunned in their own homes brings up visions of the Nazi Action and the ghettos and Schindler's List. Like that's the vision that it brings up. That level of vulnerability and weakness that Israel was meant to be, a bulwark against, And the fact that Israel would, or that Jews would be in that situation, that Israelis on their own land would be in the situation again, is what's so deeply shocking about it. It's not a soldier dying at the front, which is of course tragic. This is very different. I mean, the stories that come out of some of these pathologists and the people, again, the Zaka people who clean up literally the human remains of people like literally tied together with wire. The wife raped, the father killed, the kid like alive in the next room, saved miraculously, like things like that. People burned alive, like literally children beheaded. Like these sort of things are just horrors beyond comprehension, right? And again, it's very different than wartime casualties, which to some degree Israel always has. And so I think that's why it's such an affront to people. And if you go talk to people, the weird thing is you might ask, like, why the hell were they living out there so close to Gaza? Like, if you go look at Google Maps, like literally the fields of the kibbutz goes up to like literally the wire. Like, how could they trust it so much? And if you talk to them, it's like there was this compact with the government; they would protect us. And so, yes, on that side, there's badness and whatever, but we're here, and it's different, and the government will protect us. And it's again, I think in the Western mind, we're not used to living to like literally a foreign enemy who, in this very ethnic, genocidal way, wants to destroy you. But in Israel, it's more common. I mean, look, you go to Jerusalem and you cross East Jerusalem and you drive through an Arab village and you're kind of nervous, but then you go back to this and that, and things are a lot closer. And you kind of see the enemy or the other in the face in a way here that you don't, I think, in the West. But I guess that's the feeling of vulnerability, the feeling of Jews killed on their own soil, not in wartime, literally women and children, old people, just total horrors visited on the Israeli populace. And it's hit people pretty hard, right? I mean, it's, again, this is what Israel is meant to prevent. And it didn't prevent it. Right?
Going back to like what could happen, you mentioned Israel's, bracing for war. It's going to try to destroy Hamas. Is it going to, are we going to have a massive refugee sort of situation? Like, are 2 million people going to have to get moved, or a big chunk of them? Does Israel like annex, more properly, or like, what is the end state for this? Or 2 years from now, where are we?
I don't know. Nobody knows. I asked everybody that question. Nobody has any sort of cogent answer, and then they in fact admit Israeli opinions about lots of things, but about this or something like, oh, I don't know. Yeah, what is going to happen? Because none of the solutions look amazing. Like, no, they're not going to push out 2 million Palestinians. The Egyptians don't want them, right? The reality is that no Arab country will accept them as refugees, because every country they've been admitted into, they've caused a civil war, whether it be Lebanon or Jordan, right? But the Black September terrorists were named after basically a civil war that Palestinians threw against the Jordanians, in which they were massacred, right? And then they had to decamp to Lebanon, right? Like nobody, I mean, for all that that the Middle East or the Arab world claims to support the Palestinian cause, nobody actually wants to accept Palestinian refugees, and so that's just not going to happen, right?
Yeah, they're pro-Palestinian when it's the Israelis' problem, not when it's their problem.
Right, exactly. So yeah, I mean, occupation. I mean,
why isn't annexation going to happen?
What would you annex? A pile of concrete rebar that's been blown to pieces. What are you annexing exactly? I mean, that's between the West Bank and Gaza. Like Gaza, I mean, the West Bank is some historical in the mind of those who do want to annex it, and there is a small part of Israeli society for which that's true. The West Bank is the tomb of the patriarchs are there. It's parts of it's part of the promised land described in the Bible. That's not true of the Gaza Strip, right? The Gaza Strip is way off in left field, literally, and there's no particular desire to annex it. But and it's funny, like few people actually know Israeli history. 2 times ago that I was in Israel was actually when Israel pulled out of Gaza. So Israel used to occupy, or was partially occupy parts of Gaza. There were settlements actually in Gaza. Last time I was here, Ariel Sharon was PM, Ariel Sharon, right wing, kind of a hard ass. He pulled Israel out of Gaza, which was very controversial. And he literally forcibly pulled the settlers screaming and yelling out of their settlements and just gave everything Gaza Strip. That's it. And then I think a year or two later, they had an election and they voted Hamas into power. Right. So Gaza's not been occupied for almost 20 years. Right. And yet here we are. So I know they don't want to occupy it realistically. So I don't know. I mean, the most if I was betting on scenarios, the only thing that sounds vaguely realistic is that they're going to have, the Palestinian Authority, PLO, whatever, govern Gaza basically as a puppet government of the Israelis, right? And at least they're secular and they're relatively sane, and they're not ISIS-like in their barbarity. But I don't know what other outcome is there potentially other than that.
Yeah, I think it's worth pointing out, and it sounds like we have some listeners who claim to understand the situation, but the difference between Hamas and the PA, right? And like the history of the conflict, like Yasser Arafat was not Hamas. It's a different thing. And so Gaza and the West Bank, the two enclaves of Palestinian population within the kind of border of Israel, are run by different groups. One with an expressed charter to destroy Israel and Hamas, and the other one, the PA. And you actually see some of this in it's fictional, but Fauda, right? Like where the collaborator on the other side in the show that is Palestinian is the security chief from the Palestinian Authority, and it's the break-off groups, including Hamas, that are the primary antagonists. And so,
Yeah,
I mean, again, it's a fictional show, although, I mean, Antonio, you were the one that brought this up. Like, Fauda, like, there's a lot of truth in a lot of what the plots there. The actors themselves were in these kind of special forces units. They've been called.
The creators were in the same Shabak unit, the internal security unit, where Israelis, again, another thing. Speaking of ethnic cleansing, Jews were ethnically cleansed out of the Middle East, right? They were. There used to be thriving Jewish populations in almost every country in the Middle East. And when Israel triumphed in its various wars, they all got kicked out. And one of the greatest historical ironies of history is that literally the descendants of the people that were ethnically cleansed, the Jews that were kicked out of the Middle East, became the agents that were able to actually act like Arabs or like Persians and actually infiltrate those countries and undermine the schemes against Israel. That is indeed one of the world's great enemies. And so, everyone in that show, right, came from that world. In fact, even the star is supposed to be the child of Doron Kabilo is the child of an Iraqi Jew, which my driver today was an Iraqi Jew. And he was Mizrahi. And he looked like Doron, actually. Same bald head, same everything, right? So wait, how did we get here? Sorry, I'm a little scatterbrained because I spent the entire day in the sun running around. Dan, you asked a question about.
Well, I was just bringing up
the fun thing.
Point of Fauda.
The fun thing. So Fauda's correct, right? In the sense that Gaza, I think the third of the last season took place in Gaza, right? Which seems kind of like far fetched because, like, what the hell would you be doing in Gaza? And again, I think, and it's understandable, right? It's Americans, like, it all bleeds together. Like, Gaza, West Bank, it's very different, right? Again, Gaza literally is like a 5-kilometer wide strip in the middle of fucking nowhere. It's like the equivalent of like Arizona or something in the United States, right? It's like the far, like, southwestern reaches of a country versus the West Bank, which is like, I don't know, a third or a half the size of Israel proper, has historical cities, right, that go back, forever, like Ramallah, and they interleave. East Jerusalem is largely Arab, in fact. And like, remember, I was coming back from the protests in July. There was traffic on the main highway, and so we cut into the West Bank, across what's called the Green Line, which is a historical 1967 border, and just started driving through Arab villages just to beat traffic, right? Which, by the way, gives you an idea of Israelis are so crazy. Like, they'll literally like leave what is Israel proper and go into like a little bit of the Wild West, a little bit, just to avoid traffic. But in any case, but you can do that in the West Bank. Like, again, there's an interleaving of cultures there that kind of coexist in the same way that, I don't know, there's an open line, I'm sure, between the Palestinian Authority and like the proper Israeli government in a way that there is not, between Hamas and Israel. There's not. Gaza is like in its own little world, and then there's the West Bank, right? And they're just very different. And
I think one of the most striking things for me when I visited Israel for the first time in 2019 is started in Tel Aviv. I would agree. It feels like Miami, LA with the tech scene, super secular. You can go out as late as you want. Then you go to Jerusalem, which is just completely different vibe. And if you're there on Shabbat, nothing is open. Like, there's literally like one restaurant for, Westerners. And the interesting thing, though, is we went to the north. So I think we went to a town in Safed, and then the area of Nazareth, where traditionally Jesus was from. But Jesus was born in Bethlehem, which is in the West Bank. Like, and so I think people, like, the geography of this very small country is actually pretty important to understand, because to your point, the West Bank has a lot of historical significance in terms of, I mean, isn't Jericho in the West Bank, which, like, obviously is a super old city.
One of the oldest cities in the world.
The other interesting thing is we were in Jordan before that. Yeah. We were in Jordan before that, and we went to this really old Byzantine church that is on the top of kind of a mountain, and you can see out across, right, because the Jordan River, and you can see the entire West Bank and like maybe the little bit of Jerusalem, but you kind of realize, like, this is the thing that everyone's fighting over is this area, but it is there is a lot of historical significance there relative to Gaza, which obviously there have been people in Gaza for how long, whatever. But in terms of the Holy Land, that is not the thing that people have been fighting over. Gaza is this weird thing they got in, 67 from the Egyptians, and they kind of never gave it up. Or I don't know if they got it in 67 or 73. I think it's 67.
Gaza, in the Netflix series known as The Bible, there's no episodes filmed in Gaza. Let's put it that way. They're all filmed mostly in the West Bank. But yeah, it's a strange situation. Israel is such a bizarre country, magical, but also very, very weird, deeply weird. What else are you going to ask?
And any read on what's happening in the north? Because I know that's also been this kind of, everyone's focused on Gaza because that's where the terrorist attack happened. But the scary thing in my mind is you have Hezbollah, which has probably even more resources and rockets and terrible things that can kind of rain down in Israel. And it feels like every day, just watching the Twitter open source intelligence, it's like there were like 6 IDF soldiers dead from exchange today, there. And it feels like things are starting to escalate quite a bit on the border with Lebanon.
Yeah. So the northern border of Israel, again, just to delineate the risk board here a little bit, is with Lebanon, but obviously Hezbollah is sort of a proxy client organization from Iran. And they have a whole, militia group thing up there, and they fire rockets into the northern cities. And they're starting to evacuate cities up there for reasons of rocket attacks, and there's exchanging gunfire back and forth. And obviously, the fear is, for those who think that everything is World War III, is that Iran will come into the war on the side of Hezbollah, and then Israel will be fighting a 2-front war. And depending who you believe, Biden presumably stayed Bibi's hand and kept him from engaging a preemptive attack on the north. Or so it was semi-reliably tweeted. There's stuff going up north as well. But it's also not the first time Israel's fought a 2-front war. The Yom Kippur War was a 2-front war. War of Independence was a 5-front war, et cetera, et cetera. But it's funny, like talking to the Israelis, it's strange because this place feels like the United States. It's like very American and like in your face, and they yell the U.S. and it's also deeply not American, but in some regards it does feel very American. But I think it's Israel. It's so much its own vibe. I think they're not totally self-aware of how they fit into the Western intellectual framework. I think they also don't quite understand how call it woke or whatever, progressive or whatever the West has become. And they're a little bit mystified. How is it that American leftists aren't aligned with the Israeli left, right? Which, just a level set, to use PM talk here, right? The Israeli left is it's all crunchy, hippy dippy kibbutz, but the moment the air raid sirens go on, they're the most vicious warriors in Israel. The original, the class that fought, at least in the mind and in reality too. The class that fought the 67 war and the Yom Kippur war were the kibbutz, the guys from the kibbutz who were the tough farmers who settled the land and then, took up a rifle and, fought against the invading Arabs, right? That is kind of the mystique. And those guys, just to be clear, were total socialists, total secular socialists, right? Like the Mapai, which was the labor government that ran every government until they fumbled the Yom Kippur war. By the way, in Israel, wars have a way of doing that. If you fumble the war, you lose the next election, right? So we'll see. Bibi's going to probably lose an election. But in any case, the Israeli left is super crunchy, hippy dippy. Like I said, if in the U.S. you go move to Portland or some shit, and here you move to a kibbutz and you vote left wing, but you still serve in the army. By the way, all these kibbutz, some of them, by the way, fended off the attacks because they all have security personnel, so that they're not peaceniks. They don't understand how is it that America or the Western left aligns with the Palestinians, who, seen from what they did on, as they call it here, literally Black Sabbath, or Black Saturday is the name for it, by the way, which is the day of the attack, because the Arab world likes attacking on Jewish holidays for the sense of the element of surprise. How can you reconcile? How can they take the side of what seems to be a genocidal theocratic death cult, which Hamas kind of is? Right? How can they take the side of it? So you have to explain, this and that, but they don't quite get it, right? And I think. I don't know. I mean, this is why
they enjoy being considered white for the purposes of American political, cultural
Israelis are so not white. They're the least white people you ever met.
Determined to be white. Yeah. No, that's the crazy thing is you go to Israel and it's the kind of
it's not white.
How different everyone looks despite being and so to be basically classified as white in the U.S. because white is bad, and somehow Hamas gets labeled as brown. and so therefore is the oppressed group.
Right. And by the way, if you think Hamas is brown, you've never met a Levantine Arab. They're white as the driven snow. But in any case, not that it matters. But it's not the image they have in their heads of what an Arab looks like. Yeah, I mean, part of me, again, we've discussed Tom Holland and Christianity and Judaism and all that in here. I think one of the, the AGM bingo card has some mention of Judaism or something. But it is strange when your moral and theological playbook is the Old Testament, right, from the Christian perspective. It does not include the Gospels at all, right? Like it's different. It's a different world. It's has a lot of elements of Christianity, right, of equal dignity and all that stuff, but a lot of it's a little bit Bronze Age, right? And, in the Bible, right, I quoted one of the passages. There was this tribe called the Amalekites who attacked the biblical Hebrews' rear when they were coming from Egypt, and then there's actually a mitzvah to remember Amalek, which is considered to be like the great enemy of the Jewish people, which passes from generation to generation. The Amalekites get wiped out in the Bible, by the way. And so there's a little bit of that too, right, in the Jewish mentality. And I think broadly speaking, I mean, getting beyond the God of wrath in the Bible, a lot about Israeli culture, even people firmly on the left, to be clear. Like, we're not talking like the hard right wingers. We're talking secular Israeli left. Is just like Naftali Bennett, who was born in America, made millions as a software entrepreneur, and was the PM before Bibi. He tweeted a thing, and it was a couple, because everyone mobilized, right? So all the plans got canceled. Like, all your family life events are like now canceled. A couple got married on an army base, and I tweeted about it. It's like, if you didn't know it, Israel looks like a fascist military dictatorship. It's like the most militarized society you've ever seen, right? Like, everybody's in the army, guns everywhere. It feels very different. And so they had their wedding at the army base. The guy literally had a rifle slung around his neck, because people just commonly carry rifles around if they're in the service. And then another, I forget who tweeted it, but somebody tweeted a thing, and it's like, again, similar life event. His son was having a bar mitzvah, which is the Jewish coming of age. And so they brought the bar mitzvah to the army base. And so there is the little 12-year-old kid, or 13 or whatever, and he's surrounded by guys in uniform. They bring out the Torah, oh my God, the holy book. They all start singing and dancing. Everyone's armed. Again, seen from the American perspective, it looks insane, right? It looks like, who the fuck are these religious wackos who are armed to the fucking teeth and are like all organized into this army? But again, it's not that. Like, the vibe isn't like this hyper violent thing, but it is the case that it's a conscript army, and this is just what life is like here, right? And I think Israelis don't understand how that comes across, and how it comes across as not great from the sort of default Western view right now. And it's bizarre, because again, like, well, what do you mean, Antonio? How does that come across compared to all the horrible videos that came out of Hamas killing civilians? How does that look? It looks terrible. But there's definitely a double standard applied to Israel, in a way that the same moral judgments that are applied to Israel are not applied to other governments in the region. It's obviously unfair, but that's reality of it. I think,
Darwin might say anti-Semitic.
I hate using that term but yeah.
No, I don't like it either. But like, I just feel like it's they're held to some crazy standard that no one else would hold any other country to.
Certainly not other countries in the region, which they clearly don't hold it to. Yeah.
Well, I mean, and then you have also the like LGBTQ plus whatever for Palestine. It's like, do you know what they do to people in Gaza? That reminds me of one of the saltiest. That reminds me of one of the saltiest jokes that I heard. I can't repeat even on MOC, but yeah, it's definitely right. But the reality is, like, to cite the Christian thing of forgive them, so they know not what they do. Like, they're playing it as like an intellectual game and as virtue signaling. They don't really understand what it would mean to have Gaza take over, San Francisco, and how, guess what? I think the Pride Parade is canceled, among other things. They don't really perceive it as a reality, because they don't have the fear in their own skin. They don't really know what that is to be. Or, oh my God, wait, you mean I can't just call the HR department? It's like, I don't think so, bro. I'm just like, this is the whole, you're at the fringes of like your order giving way to another order that doesn't understand or doesn't agree with even your most basic values. But yeah, I think, again, as someone who kind of converted to Judaism and came here partially for that reason, and someone who, was raised Catholic and now sees from the other side, there's definitely this vibe. It's almost like if you read the letters of Paul in the Gospels, right? Which, for those who aren't familiar, Paul's the guy, he's the brilliant product manager who turned what was this weird Jewish messianic cult into what we now know as Christianity, right? So he basically took Judaism, which was this very
niche product like Linux, say, like very powerful but super hard to use. And then he turned it into like Mac OS 10, right? And then sold it to like half the world, right? And he, in the letters, he sits there and he kind of like lectures the Jews for not giving up their old traditions and accepting this beautiful new covenant. And a lot of the West lecturing Israel feels like that. Like, wait, how can you not be adopting this brilliant new, millenarian philosophy of this new kingdom of God on earth that we're all bringing, this universalist vision of how everything should run? And I think the reason why Israel is an outcast among nation states is the same reason the Jew was an outcast among European peoples for the last 2,000 years, which is their sort of stiff-necked refusal to abandon their traditions and their peoplehood, and their equally stiff-necked refusal to sort of adopt the universalist millenarian crusade as embodied in the Gospels and its secular descendants, like wokeness and all that, and social justice and all the rest of it. They refuse to go along with that. They're not accepting universalism. They're comfortable in their particularism and they won't abandon it, even the Israeli left. And that fundamentally is the problem, right? I think, and that's an unbridgeable divide.
Antonio, we've spent some time on this podcast talking to Liel and Alana and Jacob and some other tablet folks about kind of the intra-civil war among Israelis. The 2/3 of the country that wants Israel to be sort of a Jewish state, and the 1/3 that just wants it to be a state for Jews, i.e., New York with some Judaism, but how the 1/3 kind of is controls the institutions, or they're the more creative class, the entrepreneurial class, more elite class. How does that civil war, or sort of metaphorical civil war, how does that evolve? Given how does that change? It's gone. So what happens now? What is sort of intra-country Israeli sentiment?
Yeah, it's gone. I mean, it's funny. There's so many strangely beautiful things about Israeli society. It's very unlike a Western society in many ways, and it doesn't realize it. But one way, again, we had a very divided nation, similar to the red. I mean, in a very high level way, very similar to the red-blue divide in the United States, right? And that everyone was politically at each other's throats and trying to use the institutions of the state to advocate their particular vision of the world, particularly this divide between Jewish states, state of Jews, etc. But again, like literally that instantly flipped. A lot of the organizations that are now helping out with the war effort in ways that are perceived because the government failed. Like what, I've got the 2 bulletproof vests that I took down south. Like I'm going to donate them. Why do I have to be importing ballistic armor to the most militarized country in the world, which has a super high fraction of its GDP dedicated to the military? Like why do we need to do this? And a lot of American Jews bought all sorts of supplies, drove them down. Like why does the civil society, which is very strong in Israel, have to fill in for the gaps in the government? If you're on the left, you'll blame Bibi for it. Like this guy's a total fuck up. Why didn't he do what he should do? Unfortunately, in this whole little epic of mine, I haven't talked to too many people on the right. It's mostly people on the left. But yeah, they blame it on Bibi. But like for now, it's like we'll deal with that later. For now, the war is still going on, and we'll deal with it later. Yeah, I don't know what that divide. I don't think the divide is going away. That divide is going to stay. It's going to be real. Like I read this piece in Tablet, right? There's a demographic shift happen. Israel is moving to the right and more religious over time, and that's just, unless the trend line changes by a lot, that's going to be the future, and that's still going to be another unbridgeable divide between those who really see it as a Jewish state and those who see it as a nation state that happens to have mostly Jews.
Should Israel consider being more ambitious here, or given the unique opportunity it has to make a significant move, or is there just no chance of that?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I think, what do I see happening? I see the government spending billions of dollars to build even higher fences, mine everything, literally have like a 1 kilometer, 2 kilometer long standoff area from the fence. If you go to the West Bank, they've got, and Dan, who went to Bethlehem, will remember the 30-foot concrete walls that you saw that are like the most uncrossable things you've ever seen in your entire life, but are very expensive to build. I imagine you're going to see a lot more to that, because what there is in the Gaza fence is literally a fence. It's obviously not that hard to get through. So I imagine they're going to mine it more security, more troops stationed down there. I mean, one of the criticisms is, we're so focused. Again, this is the anti-Bibi, anti-religious criticism. We spent so much time protecting the settlers in the West Bank that we totally forgot about Gaza. I don't know if that's true or not. That's like one of the talking points. Like, we focus so much on the West Bank because of these crazy religious Zionists who are hyper-fixated in the West Bank, or Judea Samaria, as we call it. That we let our eye off the ball in Gaza. Again, I don't know if that's actually true, but that's kind of the vibe. So the reaction to that would be spending more money on Gaza security. But I don't know. Like I was at the Berry, this kibbutz that again was sort of decimated by terrorism, and they got the factory, which is where they make most of their money, up again in a week. Literally, the week happened. Like the bodies are still being identified. They're being identified now. They're still being identified, and they got the factory running again, right? And so they clearly want to invest in that region again. How many people are actually going to move back? I don't know, because again, that was all based on the compact where like the government will protect us. And even though there are barbarians or what are perceived to be barbarians, 2 kilometers that way, we're safe. We're okay. I can let my kids run around and whatever.
I agree with Antonio. The only thing that Israel has as an option is increase the security. So what do I actually think probably happens? The Israelis were actually the first ones to develop drones for military use. It's actually in that book, Rise and Kill First, which I always talk about. They talk about how they wanted kind of eyes in the sky and the ability. And that's actually where the Americans first saw the operational capabilities of using drones, right? So the Israelis were the first ones to use that in war zone. And then obviously the war in Iraq, the American and Afghanistan, the Americans really perfected it. And now we're at a point where drones are so cheap that you have the poor terrorists being able to use them. But if you look at Anduril, their first product was selling to the U.S. border and putting kind of drones and remote towers. And I would imagine that is going to be a huge boom industry where, hey, we're going to do increased security on the border, but then we're going to do even more automation, drones, early warning systems. And I do think that they're probably going to try to eliminate as much of Hamas as they can, although you'll probably just have something come up in its place, right? Like you never remove that hatred.
Yeah, look, I mean, exactly. I mean, the just move the Palestinians out, like that doesn't even register in the leftist mind. Like again, like Biden posted about the 2-state solution as if it's like a real thing. I mean, the thought. Yeah,
it was the Palestinians who rejected it. Like that's the thing.
I mean, that is historically true, but
Yasser Arafat said no at Camp David.
Well,
but like,
yeah,
it's never been actually about a 2-state solution.
Right. I mean that's the part that I think Western leftists can't accept. That it's about the destruction of the state of Israel, and they're not going to really be satisfied until that's the case. And that's not going to happen anytime soon. So here we are. I mean, it's this unstoppable force meets an immovable object, and forever. I don't think there's not a happy ending here. Right. There's just more of the same in various forms, and more tragedy, but also more people getting married and more but mitzvahs and more. One of the videos that Israeli shared soon after the tragedy is a soldier who was watching his son's bris, the circumcision, 8 days after they're born, on his phone because they call it the reserve duty, right? So you see the sprouts of life after the sort of pageant of death that was the attacks, and life goes on, and it's an imperfect reality. I think I've quoted this author more than once, and maybe it's a good thing to wrap on. Dana Horn, whose book "People Love Dead Jews," I think is a brilliant book about how the Christian world kind of frames the Jewish problem, so to speak, of how Jews exist in the majority Christian world. And a lot of what you mentioned, what I think is brilliant from a sort of literary point of view, is how the Christian narrative is so different than the Jewish narrative, right? If you look, how does the Christian Bible literally end? It literally ends in the book of Revelation, in which the apocalypse happens, and then Christ returns, and then it's utopia, right? And whether that be the utopia of communism or the utopia of social justice, there's always some like beautiful little happy ending with a bow on it in every sort of Christian narrative. How does the Hebrew Bible end? Well, Moses sees the promised land and then does a little bit of writes his will, gives a little bit of territory here, and then he dies, and that's it. And you don't even know the end. This whole saga is followed along, and there is no fixed ending. The other example I would cite, a little bit less literary than the end of the respective Bibles, is that movie Munich about the Wrath of God thing that Spielberg made about the Wrath of God was a thing when the terrorism at the Munich Olympics, they actually went off and tried to and killed most of the terrorists who actually did it. By the way, the Wrath of God Part 2 is coming, in which the Shabak, it's been reliably leaked that they're forming a team to actually kill every terrorist participation in the activities. And so like you're looking at the faces and they're going to like hunt them down one after another. Although of course now it's hundreds of people, it's not dozens of people. But in any case, movie Munich was about the Wrath of God V1, in which they, it's been reported now through many channels that they actually hired a team and they organize a team and they kill those people. And at the end of Munich, which is a very Spielberg take on the whole thing, you've got Erik Bana, who plays the leader of you've seen Munich, right, Dan? You like the Wrath of God thing. Of course you've watched it. So at the end, you've got to say Erik Bana.
I mean, yeah.
You see, you have Erik Bana, who led the team and is having moral qualms about it because he spent years of his life away from his family engaging in this act of revenge that he starts to question by the end of it. And you've got, what's his name, Jeffrey Rush, playing his like Mossad handler, who's like the hard-bitten, hard-nosed Mossad man, right? I'm having a debate in Brooklyn Heights with a recreated World Trade Center behind him. So obviously it's in the context of that. This movie came out, I guess, in the mid-aughts, late-aughts. And Erik Vanta says, what have we done with all this killing? Everyone we killed will just be replaced by worse. And then Jeffrey Rush, playing the hard Mossad man, just responds, well, I cut my nails, but I know they'll grow back. That's his response to it. It's a very different response. And so I think the Israeli answer is just going to be, well, we're going to keep on cutting the Hamas nails because we know they're going to grow back. And there is a happy ending. I think that's the likely outcome.
Yeah. I again, no horse in the race myself, but looking at the situation, I don't think anyone who thinks that there is a solution is, in my view, naive. This is the way this is going to be. And the best you can get is better security on borders so that you don't have these atrocities. But there's going to be no fundamental change at all.
Yeah, that's right.
Well, on that somber note, should we wrap?
Yep.
Yeah, I mean, what are we going to try to sell them a Christian end to this and say everyone comes happy ever after? No, I mean, it's like this is hard shit.
Don't worry, man. Look, the Gazans just have to watch enough Netflix and then become little consumers. Gaza City's going to become a startup hub, and they're going to have HR departments too. Don't worry, that's going to happen in no time. That's exactly
that was Noah's. Just make them rich so they're fat and happy, and then they won't want to commit atrocities. And it's like,
of course,
okay, yeah.
Well, so it's just endless violence forever.
That's human nature. That's the thing. It's so utopian and Christian to assume that you will eradicate all evil and violence from the world.
At what point do you, like, what would need to be true for Israel to move people out of Palestine? Like, to just say, hey, this is never going to happen again. This can't happen.
They're not going to do that because they are moral, right? As much as the people on social media want to say it, that they are moral, right? They aren't trying to blow up hospitals, and they aren't trying to kill innocent civilians. They're doing munition knocks. Like, are there innocent people getting killed in Gaza? Yes, that's awful. But the Israelis aren't trying to do that. That is not the express objective. Hamas did do that. That was their objective. Yeah. And they would have done it even more if they had the ability to. If there's a button tomorrow that someone in Hamas can press and kill 2 million Israelis, they do it in a heartbeat.
Yeah,
right.
The Israelis have that capability right now, and they don't do it.
Right. I mean, that's what I tweeted, right? You're dealing with the people who would annihilate another people if they could, but they can't. And you've got that other people who could annihilate that first people, but they don't. And that in fact is the problem. Because if Israel is all that it's being cracked up to be by the Western left, they would have annihilated the Palestinians, but they don't. Actually, they don't, because they don't want to. That's the reality of it.
Right, and it's a Mont Bailey where basically what happens is if you criticize Hamas, then people step back and say, "Hey, I'm pro-Palestinian," and it's like that wasn't the argument. It's like there's a terrorist group that runs the Gaza Strip. What do you do? Do you just let them continue to shoot rockets and commit atrocities every decade or so, or do you eradicate them and do your best to minimize civilian casualties, where you give people weeks to migrate south, right? And it's like obviously the terrorists are moving south too. Like they're not being like, oh, okay, I guess we'll just sit here in the tunnels in the north. There are no easy solutions here. Like there are things in life that just don't have easy solutions, and I think that's what I think the average American educated person doesn't like that idea, right? The average Silicon Valley person doesn't like that idea because they feel like they can change everything. And I think that you have to get to a point that there's evil in the world and you are never going to root it all out. Like no matter how good your, degree from Harvard and like way of thinking about the world, like you just can't will that out of existence. And actually, arguably, the best way to get rid of that evil is to hit it with like 10x the force, right? Because evil understands force. It doesn't understand whatever nonviolent communication you got taught to try to explain why they shouldn't do things that they should do. For the record, MOZ had someone on the ground on this conflict versus sitting at home in the U.S. just sharing opinions.
Yeah, we got skin in the game. That's here right. At Moment of Zen.
Reality. I'm the part of MOZ that still thinks reality matters and that doesn't actually take Twitter to be reality. So yeah, that's right. But I just realized I'm so brown. I'm like so fucking tanned. I'm like, I've changed like 4 shades just from being here. I look like a Mizrahi Jew. Anyhow.
You go to Israel, you're less white, right? Like, so.
Yeah, exactly.
Less white, the chest is hairier. I start speaking, no, my Exactly. I start acting more Israeli.
All right.
All right. See you guys.
All right, take care.